First of all, it's an honor for us. They accepted the invitation. But having such eminent economists on the panel also makes my job easier, which I don't need to introduce them. They are household names in Pakistan. Zafar Masood Saab. He is the president of Bank of Punjab, and he certainly needs no introduction. It's like if I start introducing the protagonist of the film Cliffhanger. So he is he's a survivor of the PIA flight plane crash in Karachi in 2020. And he has a very compelling story to share, which he will do later in the later session. And he also has a very few people who are from corporate sector with keen interest in the literary world. So my question, again, the most pertinent question, this is the budget month of the year, and it's even more important because it's the budget of election year. And instead of giving my own perspective by elaborating the question, I would just ask this question to Dr. Ishad Hussain and Mr. Zafar Masood.
Ji, thank you. And taking the cue from Shabbar Bhai, I just want to say, especially for the elites, a couplet from John Elias' brother only, Rais Amrobi Saab's. कहने लगे कि हमको तबाही का गम नहीं, कहने लगे कि हमको तबाही का गम नहीं, हमने कहा कि ये बजाय तबाही तो है. So you know, this is the starting point. Our elites have to realize that the starting point is there for them to squeeze themselves and come out of this rent-seeking mindset. Now, coming specifically to the question that Nadir has posed on me regarding budget, my take is that, if I were to quote you some key numbers, so we're talking about, tax revenues of 9.2 trillion, and out of which, by the way, 3.5 will go away to the provinces. So 18th Amendment needs a review. Nobody's talking about it. They're really in need of the hour. We need to look at it. The second one is 2.8 trillion, which is, and these are rupees, by the way, is related to the non-tax revenues. Now that puts together 12 trillion rupees, out of which 7.5 trillion, and by the way, that's a conservative number, is debt servicing alone. And the biggest culprit there are the interest rates and the devaluation. And I'll come to that in a bit of what needs to be tackled there. The second large number is SOEs and circular debt, which is around 2.5 to 3 trillion rupees. And the last one, to my mind, right away, is the pension number, which is 1.6 trillion on a countrywide basis. But if you take into account federal government, that's around 1 trillion on its own. So that eats away the entire revenue of Pakistan if we'll be able to achieve that number, the revenue number. And, so the constraint, whether we increase by the way, everybody in Pakistan pays tax, because the indirect taxation, if you adjust the withholding tax, or non-adjustment of withholding tax into account as well, is perhaps 90%. So because of the sales tax and indirect taxes, perhaps everybody pays tax in Pakistan. But the structure of the taxation needs to be looked at. So, and perhaps this budget, or in the future budget, we need to talk about it. When it's an election year, it makes things complicated for the government. So we need to give that leeway to the government at least, that, given that constraint, whatever they had to do, they have done it. But on the expense side, I would say that more desired to be done. The subsidies have to go away. We need to do away with the subsidies. We need to do away with the PSDP of 1.21 trillion rupees. We need to let the private sector take the lead, and it should be a PPP initiative, which, thank God, this time around we saw 250 billion rupees in the budget, which, to my mind, should be even bigger. And I'll just quote you one example of a road project that has been done under PPP right now, in which 306 billion rupees is the project size. The government of Pakistan is merely committing 9.5 billion rupees. The rest is all coming from the private sector. So we need to go down that route and look at that. The budget is still followed, although there is, at least this time round for PPP, 250 billion rupees have been allocated, but I think a larger number needs to be allocated there as well. The point is that on the subsidies, we need to do away with the subsidies, and the subsidies shall be extended to only two sectors. One, to the poor and the vulnerable, and two, for the export flows to come into Pakistan, and nothing else.
Thank you, Zafar. So you mentioned about state-owned enterprise, which is making losses. We have so many very activist friends sitting here. Sometimes say, is Pakistan Army also a state-owned enterprise that is making profit or is making a loss? or is it a profit or loss? What do you think?
We need to be a bit realistic about this. And, my message very clearly is, please move away from these populist, slogans and ideas. Please, for God's sakes. Now, cutting expenses, the total government of Pakistan expenses, 650 billion rupees out of a budget of 14.4 trillion rupees. The army's budget is 1.8 trillion rupees out of 14.4 trillion rupees. And by the way, we have to understand how much is operational and how much is non-operational in there.
A quick question to all four of you. Standard question. Just very standard question, brief answers. We often compare Pakistan with peer countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, and 30 years ago, they were standing at the same point as Pakistan. In fact, Pakistan was ahead in some areas, and now they see their progress way ahead of Pakistan in terms of exports, GDP per capita, social indicators, especially in Bangladesh. The gender inequality in Bangladesh is phenomenal, the way they've achieved. So just a question to all four of you. You can start from what is the way, Pakistan, why is Pakistan lagging behind, and what's the way forward to overcome these economic challenges?
Let me just be very brief on this and very to the point. To be honest, IMF or no IMF, we have to have our homegrown policies, and we need to go a level further than what IMF is prescribing. The problem that we have is that we follow the prescription of IMF, and then even that we don't follow, and falter on that also on the way. We need to go a level further and do more which is required. And I'll quote you the example of who has achieved this and gotten rid of IMF. Right now, all roads lead to IMF, and perhaps we can't avoid IMF at all. But at least what we can do is to tighten our belt and go a level further than what they're asking for and do that. For example, in the last IMF program, there was no talk about pension. And I'm hoping, and the pension would be part of the next program as well. Even if they're not asking for it, we need to be aware of it as a hazard and needs to be addressed. And it could be addressed, by the way. But we need to not to look towards the Western world or the institutions out there to tell us what we need to do. We know what we need to do, but we need to be brave enough and strong enough to take that step and take it forward. India did that in 1993, and since that, they have never looked back towards IMF. And what did they do? Liberalized trade. They looked at bringing in private sector in the public sector projects. They encourage them to be part of the infrastructure, which no government can take on their own. Bangladesh, for that matter, inclusivity that Shabar Bhai talked about, ideal example, and of course, the population growth. Our population growth is 2.1%. Our economy is growing at 0.3. Here we go, it's 3.6 now. And in Bangladesh, on the other hand, is 1.1%. Inclusivity, 33% of the women are part of the workforce. We claimed 22. I don't even think it's 22. Perhaps it's 17%. And then they were very focused in terms of extending the subsidies to the sector which were bringing in export flows. Our problem is the liquidity. I mean, export flows and FX liquidity is the way where our fiscal account has to be restructured and focused towards, as Bangladesh did.
So my name is Sadaf Musri. Just one last thing, for that to happen in China, what they did also was to talk about feudalism and land reform. So what is Pakistan doing? I know there's great speakers here and advisors to the government, but what are they doing to create land reform, which is a necessary step to even talk about any of housing or education, infrastructure reform in Pakistan? So those are two questions.
No, misnomer and a populist, slogan, I would say. Land reform by default has happened in Pakistan now. 89% of our total land holdings are below 12.5 acres. And 63% are below 5 acres of land. So in fact, we need to go in the other direction in order to get the yields up, which is a basic requirement to achieve 6% growth rate. We need to go for cooperative agriculture model, then, talking about land reforms.